next matchup, we've got Drew Dober taking on Ricky Glenn. Man, this is like the like all the guys that have ever fought in this 170, 185 archetype. They all kind of fought each other, that same milieu. Same thing here at 155 pounds. You know, these guys have fought the Bobby Greens and the Grant Dawsons and whatever, you know, at various points in their career. You look at a Drew Dober, and he's fought everybody, you know, 26-12, ton of professional fights. And this, for me, feels like a get-right matchup for Drew Dober. That's what it feels like to me, because I look at Ricky Glenn on paper, and I like Ricky Glenn. You know, I just disclosed that one of the best bets I ever made was Ricky Glenn plus 400 against Grant Dawson. You know, he gave him a real test there. At the end of the fight, he told him, I whooped your ass, you know, and he did. In round 3, he let him know what time it was. Ricky Glenn was landing some big shots there, but it was mostly a function of, you know, Grant Dawson kind of gassing out. Christos Giagos is a guy that I've never really been high on in the UFC. You know, I picked against him in his last fight. I picked against him probably in every fight. And I picked against him with Ricky Glenn. You know, I thought Ricky Glenn had a really favorable matchup against a guy like that. I was like, man, Ricky Glenn should go out here and just beat this guy everywhere. You know, I think he should be better on the mat, and I think he should be better on the feet. And his chin, you know, just failed him in that spot. He got knocked out brutally. He has been submitted in the past by Lance Palmer, who's a very high-level wrestler from Ohio State. So shout out, go Bucks. But when you look at, you know, his other results, he's been very difficult to finish historically. He's had a good chin. And so it's a little bit concerning to me. He's an older lightweight. You know, he's coming off a knockout loss. Both these guys are 34 years of age, you know, so it's not like either one of them's a spring chicken. The guy with more fights is Drew Dober, and both of them are coming off of KO losses. But I think that it's categorically different to lose to a guy like Matt Frivola by knockout than it is to lose to a guy like Christos Giagos by knockout. That's me personally. I think that that's fair play by Fubo. Good point that both of them are coming off those knockout losses. But, you know, Ricky Glenn is a little bit taller here, but otherwise these guys are at reach parity. They're at virtual age parity, a couple months older on the Drew Dober side. And Drew Dober is a massive favorite here. So that does feel a little bit wide to me just looking at these Tapology odds, because I do think that his chin is starting to get a little bit tested. I thought that Rafael Alves landed some clean shots. I thought that Bobby Green was easily winning that fight until he got knocked out. You know, and he did get brutally knocked out there. Terrence McKinney almost had Drew Dober out of there as well. So there was a bunch of fights in this recent run that could have went against him. That being said, the Brad Riddell fight was a very close fight. Could have went his way. I think he hurt Brad Riddell in that fight as well. So Drew Dober is a guy that is, you know, capable of knocking out virtually any lightweight, but he doesn't really love being taken down. You know, he could be a little bit susceptible on the mat at times, but he's a fan favorite. I think he's a lot more of a recognizable name. If I just had to guess, he's going to be a way bigger social media A-side in this spot. And when I'm looking at, you know, this kind of fight, I'm looking at a guy in Drew Dober who's been fighting Bobby Green, Alves, McKinney, Riddell, Makachev, Hernandez, Hackbrass, Beneil Dariush. These are absolute hammers on hammers on hammers. And when I look at Ricky Glenn, he's fighting a different quality of opposition in my view. Christos Giagos, Grant Dawson, that was a good fight and a good result for him. Even the draw, that's a good result for him. Joaquim Silva, a guy who's, you know, probably fringe top 25. Kevin Aguilar, a guy who I don't believe is with the promotion anymore, but he's certainly not very high level. And I think Ricky Glenn missed weight for that fight. He did by 3.5 pounds. Dennis Bermudez, that's a good win, but it was a good win at the wrong time. You know, I feel like that was probably at the tail end of Dennis Bermudez's run when he had started to accumulate some losses. In fact, it was his second to last UFC fight. He got a win and then retired from the UFC. So Dennis Bermudez, shout out. He's a Section 9 guy. He's a local, so we wish him the very best. You know, and I just feel like Ricky Glenn kind of caught him at the right time. He was 10-7 as a UFC fighter. Very good. Nothing to hang your hat on. But it was also right at the end of his run. So you look at Miles Jury, a guy that, you know, again, I don't know that he had many fights after that in the promotion. He had 2 more fights in the promotion. He lost both of them, and then he went on to Bellator, Miles Jury. So, yeah, Miles Jury, not a bad fighter at all, but he is a guy that, again, went on to lose his next 2 UFC fights and get cut. Gavin Tucker got the win there. Way back in the day, Gavin Tucker, a guy who's been on hard times, Felipe Nover. And back in the day, he had a very good run in the World Series of Fighting. So Ricky Glenn's not a bad fighter. He is a good fighter to be at these big plus money odds. But I just think that the guy who's got the bigger punch in this fight is a guy like Drew Dober. You know, I feel like Drew Dober is just a bigger hitter, and I feel like he's a little bit more dangerous on the feet. So for me, the tape study here is going to be about, can Ricky Glenn, create real problems for Drew Dober with the grappling and the wrestling, because that's where Drew starts to make bad decisions in my view. So that's what I'm interested to see. Terry Mizzo says, what's good, Liam? Good evening, brother, and a good evening to you. Cheers to you. Appreciate everybody who's